In a small town where kindness still matters, Tom Wilson's calloused hands tell the story of a life spent fixing broken things. One evening, as autumn leaves dance in the twilight, he spots an elderly woman weeping beside her dry well. Despite his own empty wallet and aching bones, Tom can't walk away. Hours pass as he works by lantern light, refusing payment when water finally flows again. He leaves with nothing but a tired smile and the satisfaction of helping a neighbor in need. But fate has other plans. The next morning brings news that changes everything, news about a widow with no family and a decision that will echo through generations. What could this lonely woman possibly give that would make a humble mechanic break down in tears? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The worn sign of Wilson's Auto Repair creaked gently in the morning breeze, its faded letters telling the story of 20 years' service to the community of Millbrook. Inside the garage, Tom Wilson's weathered hands moved with practiced precision over the engine of Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal hung in the air, mixing with the earthy autumn breeze that drifted through the open bay doors. His father's toolbox sat beside him, its red paint chipped and worn, but the tools inside maintained with religious devotion. Each wrench and socket had its place, just as his father had taught him 3 decades ago. Tom reached for the 916 socket, his fingers finding it without looking, muscle memory built from thousands of similar mornings. "How's it looking, Tom?" Mrs. Henderson called from the waiting area, her voice carrying the warmth of someone who'd known him since he was a boy, changing oil in his father's shop. "Almost done, Mrs. H," he replied, wiping his hands on the red shop rag tucked into his belt. "Your timing belt was about ready to give up, but we caught it in time. Should save you a world of trouble down the road." He didn't mention that the parts had cost him more than he was charging her. Mrs. Henderson lived on a fixed income, and Tom knew her Social Security check only stretched so far. It wasn't the first time he'd cut his margins to help a neighbor, and it wouldn't be the last. The bell above the office door chimed, and Tom heard his daughter Sarah's voice chatting with Mrs. Henderson. At 17, Sarah had her mother's grace and her father's practical mind. She'd started helping at the shop after school, handling the books with a precision that made Tom proud and slightly embarrassed about his own haphazard accounting methods. "Dad, the bank called again about the loan payment," Sarah said quietly as she passed by, heading for the office computer. Her voice carried concern, but no judgment. She understood their situation better than most teenagers would. Tom nodded, pushing down the familiar weight that settled in his stomach whenever money came up. The shop was making enough to keep the lights on and food on the table, but not much more. With Sarah's college applications going out and the equipment starting to show its age, the margins were getting tighter every month. He finished up Mrs. Henderson's car, walking her through the repairs and watching as she drove away in her now purring Buick. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting long shadows through the open garage doors as he cleaned his tools and returned them to their proper places in the old red toolbox. Sarah appeared at his elbow with a cup of coffee, made exactly as he liked it, black with just a hint of sugar. "You've got the Petersons' truck coming in at 10, and Mr. Martinez needs his brake check by 2, she reminded him, already the more organized of the two. Tom took a sip of the coffee, savoring its warmth. "What would I do without you keeping me straight?" he asked, reaching out to ruffle her hair like he used to when she was small. She ducked away with a laugh, but not before he caught the flash of worry in her eyes. They both knew what was coming. The college acceptance letters would start arriving soon, and with them the reality of tuition payments that seemed as insurmountable as mountains. Sarah had the grades for a scholarship, but even a partial one would leave them stretching dollars, thinner than they'd ever been stretched before. Still, Tom wouldn't let her see his concern. His daughter had dreams bigger than their small town, bigger than this garage with its familiar smells and worn concrete floor. He'd figure something out, he always did. After the last customer left for the day, Tom sat at his cramped desk, the overhead fluorescent light flickering as he sorted through the mail. Among the usual bills and parts catalogues lay a thick envelope addressed to Sarah from Stanford University. His hands trembled slightly as he set it aside, unopened. This was her dream school, the one she'd been talking about since freshman year. The letter seemed to pulse with possibility and terror in equal measure. Tom pulled out his reading glasses and opened the shop's ledger instead, though the numbers hadn't changed since he'd checked them that morning. The column of figures marched down the page like an army of tiny soldiers, each one a reminder of the growing gap between income and necessity. Sarah's footsteps on the stairs from their small apartment above the shop broke his concentration. He quickly slipped the college letter into his desk drawer next to the photo of Claire, Sarah's mother. Claire's smile beamed up at him from behind the glass, unchanged since the day she'd taken that picture, just months before the cancer took her. "I thought I might find you doing the books," Sarah said, setting a plate of reheated lasagna on the corner of his desk. "You need to eat, Dad." Tom managed to smile, pushing aside the ledger. "Your mother would be proud of how you take care of me. She'd tell you to hire a proper bookkeeper," Sarah replied, perching on the edge of the desk. Her fingers traced the worn edge where decades of elbows had smoothed the wood. "I've been thinking about community college, you know, at least for the first 2 years." The words hit Tom like a physical blow. "No," he said more sharply than he intended. "You've worked too hard. Your mother and I always said you'd go wherever your grades could take you. But Dad—" But nothing. Tom stood, moving to the window that overlooked Main Street. The evening light painted the empty sidewalks in shades of amber and shadow. "Your mother saved for your education since the day you were born. She believed in you." What he didn't say was that most of those savings had gone to Claire's medical bills in those final months. They'd both agreed, Claire had insisted, that living was more important than saving just then. They'd believed there would be time to rebuild the fund later. Sarah joined him at the window, her reflection overlaying his in the glass. At 17, she looked so much like Claire it sometimes stole his breath. "I know you're worried about the money," she said softly. "I'm not blind, Dad. I see the late notices, the way you skip lunch to make sure we can afford parts for Mrs. Henderson's car." Tom turned to face his daughter, seeing not just Claire in her features, but his own determination in the set of her jaw. "Money's just numbers," he said, though they both knew it wasn't that simple. "We'll figure it out. Always have." Sarah pulled an envelope from her back pocket, another college letter, this one already opened. "I got early acceptance to State," she said. "Full scholarship for engineering." Pride and relief warred in Tom's chest. State had an excellent engineering program, not Stanford, but solid, practical, the kind of choice he should be encouraging. But he could see the way Sarah's eyes didn't quite meet his, the slight downturn of her mouth that meant she was settling for less than her dreams. "Show me the Stanford letter," she said suddenly. Tom startled. "How did you—" "The mail carrier told me she delivered it. She was excited for me." Sarah's smile was gentle. "You can't protect me from everything, Dad, not even rejection letters." He retrieved the envelope from his desk drawer, watching as she opened it with steady hands. The silence as she read stretched like taffy, sweet but tense. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I got in," she whispered. "Early admission to the engineering program." The weight of possibility and terror settled more firmly on Tom's shoulders, but he pulled his daughter into a tight hug, letting her excitement wash over him. They would figure it out. They had to. Claire would accept nothing less. Long after Sarah had gone to bed, Tom sat in his favorite chair by the apartment window, turning his wedding ring with his thumb, a habit he'd never lost in the 12 years. Since Claire's passing, the silver band had worn thin in places, marked by countless hours of work under car hoods and beside broken-down engines. Claire used to tease him about it, saying the ring was slowly becoming part of his hand, just as she'd become part of his heart. The town's streetlights cast pools of yellow light on the empty street below, reminding him of another late night. Years ago, when he'd gotten a call from old Bill McCarthy, Bill's truck had broken down 10 miles outside of town while he was rushing his wife, Martha, to the hospital. Tom had driven out in the tow truck, fixed the alternator by flashlight, and followed them to make sure they made it. Little Jenny McCarthy had been born an hour later. Now Jenny was graduating high school alongside Sarah. The McCarthy family never forgot what Tom had done that night. They'd brought him dinner every Christmas since, though they could barely afford their own holiday celebrations. That was the way of small towns. Kindness circled back, though never in ways you could count on or plan for. His eyes drifted to the small shelf where Claire's nurse's cap still sat, pristine in its glass case. She'd worn it proudly at the county hospital until the day she became a patient there herself. Even then, she'd never stopped caring for others. In her final weeks, she spent more time comforting her fellow patients than resting, her gentle spirit unchanged by the pain that racked her body. "The world's got enough suffering in it," she'd told him once, her voice weak but her eyes bright. "We've got to help where we can, when we can." Those words had become his guiding principle after she was gone. When Mr. Peterson's farm equipment broke down during harvest, Tom worked through the night to get it running again. When the widow Johnson's car needed repairs, he'd spread the payments over 6 months without interest. When the high school's auto shop program lost funding, he'd volunteered to teach basic maintenance classes on weekends. The ring caught the light as he twisted it again, and he remembered the day Claire had slipped it on his finger. They'd been so young, so full of dreams about the garage they'd built together. She'd been the one with the head for business, the one who'd insisted they set aside money each month for Sarah's future. Without her practical wisdom balancing his generous instincts, the garage probably would have gone under years ago. A car passed below, its headlights sweeping across the wall of family photos Claire had arranged so carefully. There was Sarah's first day of school, Claire kneeling beside her to straighten her backpack. Tom's first day owning the garage, Claire holding the keys with a triumphant smile. Their last family vacation to the coast before the diagnosis changed everything. The sound of Sarah turning in her sleep drifted from her bedroom, and Tom smiled despite his heavy thoughts. Claire would be so proud of their daughter, straight. A's president of the robotics club and now accepted to Stanford. She'd inherited her mother's sharp mind and her father's capable hands, along with Claire's unwavering sense of right and wrong. Tom stood, his knees creaking slightly, and moved to the small desk where he kept the garage's books. The ledger lay, open to the day's figures, the columns neat and precise in Sarah's handwriting. She'd added notes in the margins, suggesting ways to streamline their inventory and reduce costs. Just like her mother would have done, his fingers traced the worn edges of Claire's old calculator, still sitting in its place of honor on the desk corner. She'd used it to balance their books for 15 years, somehow always finding a way to make the numbers work out. Now it was Sarah's turn to perform that magic, though the numbers were getting harder to juggle with each passing month. "I could use some of your practical wisdom right about now, love," he whispered to the quiet room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more cars to fix, more neighbors needing help, and somehow he'd find a way to make it all work, because that's what Claire would have expected of him, and he'd never stop trying to make her proud. The autumn evening had settled into a gentle dusk when Tom finally closed up the shop. His toolbox felt heavier than usual as he started his walk home, a route he'd taken thousands of times, past the same neat rows of small-town houses with their carefully tended gardens and familiar faces in windows. But tonight, something was different. The sound reached him first, a soft, muffled sobbing that seemed to drift over old Mrs. Thompson's fence. Tom paused, peering through the growing darkness at the elderly woman's silhouette beside her ancient well. The broken pulley system hung awkwardly, its metal arm twisted at an unnatural angle, while Mrs. Thompson stood wringing her hands over an empty bucket. The well itself was a town landmark of sorts, its weathered stone structure dating back to the 1800s. Most homes had switched to municipal water years ago, but Eleanor Thompson had always insisted on keeping her well-maintained, calling it the heart of her property. Now that heart seemed to have given out. "Mrs. Thompson," Tom called, softly, not wanting to startle her. "Everything all right?" She turned, hastily wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "Oh, Tom Wilson, I'm sorry you had to see me like this." Her voice carried the refined dignity he remembered from when she taught piano to half the town's children, including Sarah. "It's just this old well. The mechanism's finally given out, and Her voice caught. "I can't seem to draw water anymore." Tom set his toolbox down and approached the well, running his fingers over the corroded pulley system. The metal was worn thin in places, decades of use etched into its surface. The chain had jumped its track, and the support arm had cracked clean through. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, already reaching for his flashlight. Mrs. Thompson nodded gratefully, stepping back to give him room. The beam of light revealed the well's inner workings, a complex system of gears and counterweights that had faithfully served generations. Tom recognized the craftsmanship. This was the kind of mechanical engineering that had fascinated him as a boy, when his father would bring home broken things for them to fix together. "My Herbert had it specially made," Mrs. Thompson said softly, her voice warm with memory. "Said a lady shouldn't have to struggle with a simple bucket and rope. He designed the pulley system himself, you know, was quite proud of it." Tom nodded, remembering the late Mr. Thompson. He'd been the town's high school science teacher, beloved for his ability to make complex principles seem simple. "He did fine work," Tom said, identifying the problem areas. "The main supports given way, but the basic mechanism is still sound. With some reinforcement and new bearings, we could have it working again." "Oh, but I couldn't impose," Mrs. Thompson protested, though hope had crept into her voice. "You must be tired after a long day at the shop, and I know you have Sarah to get home to." Tom was already opening his toolbox, the familiar weight of his father's tools comfortable in his hands. "Sarah's studying late at the library tonight. Besides, this is exactly the kind of project I enjoy." He didn't mention that his back was already aching from a day spent bent over engines, or that his own dinner would have to wait. The old brass lantern that had hung beside the well for decades still worked, casting a warm glow over their impromptu repair session. As Tom worked, Mrs. Thompson shared stories about the well, how it had never run dry, even during the drought of '83, how neighborhood children used to gather around it on hot summer days, how her Herbert had taught physics lessons using its mechanical principles. Each story added weight to the importance of this repair beyond the simple necessity of drawing water. This wasn't just a well. It was a repository of memories, a connection to a past that seemed to be slipping away a little more each year. Tom worked carefully, respectfully, treating each component as if it were a piece of history in his hands. As the night deepened around them, Eleanor Thompson disappeared briefly into her house, returning with a thermos of hot coffee and an old pocket watch she placed carefully on the well's stone lip. The watch's gold case caught the lantern light, its face bearing the subtle scratches of decades. "Herbert's chronometer," she explained, seeing Tom's interest. "He never went anywhere without it. Said time was the most precious thing we had." She smiled softly, running her finger along its edge. "Seems even more true now that I'm old." Tom worked steadily, the familiar rhythm of repair work settling into his bones. The coffee was strong and sweet, just as his mother used to make it. Every so often, Eleanor would check the watch, as if measuring time not in minutes but in memories. "You're Sarah," Eleanor said after a comfortable silence. "She reminds me so much of myself at that age. All those dreams, that determination to make something of herself." She adjusted her shawl against the evening chill. "I heard she's applying to engineering schools." Tom looked up from where he was rebuilding the pulley mechanism. "Stanford," he said, pride and worry mixing in his voice. "She got her acceptance letter today." "Wonderful news." Eleanor's face lit up. "Though I suspect it brings its own concerns." Her perception was as sharp as ever, despite her years. She'd spent decades teaching children, watching their struggles and dreams play out across piano keys. "We'll manage," Tom said, returning to his work. The metal components were coming together under his hands, older parts joining with new ones. He'd found in his toolbox. It was like solving a puzzle, finding ways to make pieces from different eras work in harmony. Eleanor watched him work, her presence comfortable and undemanding. "You know, Herbert and I never had children of our own," she said after a while, "but watching young ones like Sarah grow, helping them find their way to music, it filled that space in our hearts. Sometimes the family we choose is as important as the family we're born to." The words settled around them like the autumn leaves gathering at their feet. Tom thought about his own chosen family, the network of neighbors and friends who'd helped him raise Sarah after Claire passed, who brought casseroles and offered childcare and never expected anything in return. "Almost there," he said, tightening the last bolt. "Let's see if she'll draw water now." The newly repaired mechanism moved smoothly as Tom turned the handle. There was a moment of resistance, then the satisfying sound of the bucket hitting water echoed up from the depths. When he brought it up, the water caught the lantern light like liquid silver. Eleanor's eyes welled with tears as she reached out to touch the cool water. "Oh, Tom," she whispered, "you've no idea what this means to me." She pulled out her wallet, but Tom held up his hand. "Put that away, Mrs. Thompson. This one's on the house." "But surely the coffee was payment enough," he said firmly, beginning to pack up his tools. Herbert's chronometer showed it was well past midnight. "Besides, what kind of neighbor would I be if I charged for helping out?" Eleanor picked up the watch, holding it close to her heart. "You're a good man, Tom Wilson. Claire would be proud of you." She hesitated, then added, "I hope you don't mind my saying so, but I think about her often. She used to bring Sarah here. For piano lessons, you know. Always stayed to chat afterward." Tom nodded, his throat tight. He remembered those afternoons. Claire sitting in Eleanor's parlor while Sarah practiced scales, the two women sharing tea and conversation. It was another, a piece of Claire he hadn't known he was holding on to. "Thank you for mentioning her," he said softly. "Sometimes it feels like the whole town is afraid to speak her name, as if they might remind me of what I've lost. But I never want to forget." Eleanor's hand found his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Some things are meant to be remembered," she said, "just as some kindnesses are meant to be repaid, whether we expect it or not." Tom gathered his tools, the weight of the box familiar and comforting. As he turned to leave, Eleanor called after him, "Tom, thank you for seeing an old woman's tears in the dark. Not everyone would have stopped." He tipped his cap, a gesture his father had taught him long ago. "Good night, Mrs. Thompson. Don't hesitate to call if you need anything else." As he walked home through the quiet streets, Tom thought about Eleanor's words about chosen family and unexpected repayment. He had no way of knowing then how prophetic those words would prove to be. Morning light filtered through the dusty windows of Wilson's Auto Repair as Tom opened up the shop, his muscles stiff from the previous night's work. The local paper lay rolled up on the doorstep, and he almost missed the small story tucked away. On the community page, "Local mechanic's late-night act of kindness touches hearts." Someone must have seen him working by the well and called it in. The town's veteran reporter Mary Chen had a way of turning simple moments into something more. She'd written about how the light from Eleanor's old brass lantern had cast shadows across the yard, about the elderly woman's tears of gratitude, about the mechanic who wouldn't take payment for his help. Tom folded the paper with a slight shake of his head, but before he could set it aside, the shop phone started ringing. It was Betty from the diner. "Tom Wilson, you humble soul," she said without preamble. "I just read about what you did for Eleanor Thompson. Your breakfast is on the house today, and I won't take no for an answer." "Betty, that's not necessary." "Hush now. Some things are necessary whether you think so or not." The bell above the door chimed as Sarah walked in, waving a copy of the paper. "Dad, you're famous." Her eyes sparkled with a mix of amusement and pride. "Mrs. Chen called me this morning for a quote, said the story's already getting shared online." Tom ran a hand through his graying hair. "It was just a simple repair job." "No, Dad," Sarah said softly, setting her backpack down. "It was never just about fixing things, and you know it. That's why people trust you. That's why they keep coming back." As if to prove her point, the morning brought a steady stream of customers, more than usual for a weekday. Each one had seen the article, and each had their own story to share about Tom's help over the years. Mr. Peterson brought in his tractor and remembered the harvest Tom had saved. Jenny McCarthy stopped by with coffee and recalled the night she was born. Around mid-morning, Mayor Richardson's sleek town car pulled up outside. The mayor herself stepped into the shop, her usual formal demeanor softened by a warm smile. "Tom," she said, extending her hand, "I should have known it would be you. Eleanor Thompson called me first thing this morning, quite insistent that the town should recognize your service to the community. She mentioned this wasn't the first time you've helped her or others without asking for payment." Tom wiped his hands on a shop rag, uncomfortable with the attention. "Just being neighborly, Mayor. Nothing special about that." "On the contrary," she replied, pulling out her phone. "The story's gone viral on social media. Small-town mechanic shows big heart. It's being shared across the country. People are calling it a reminder of what community really means." Sarah appeared at his elbow with another cup of coffee, beaming. "See, Dad, I told you people would notice eventually." The mayor nodded approvingly. "The town council is meeting this evening. We'd like you to attend, Tom. Eleanor Thompson has something she'd like to propose." After the mayor left, Tom stood in the doorway of his shop, watching the usual morning traffic flow past. The newspaper lay open on his workbench, that small story somehow feeling bigger than the headlines above it. Sarah's hand slipped into his, squeezing gently. "Mom would love this," she said. "She always said your kindness would come back to you someday." Tom thought about Claire, about Eleanor Thompson's tears of gratitude, about the mayor's mysterious invitation. Something was shifting in the air, like the change of seasons, subtle but undeniable. He could feel it in the way people looked at him today, in the way the simple act of fixing a well had sparked something larger than himself. "Your mother was right about most things," he said finally, squeezing Sarah's hand back. "But this isn't about recognition. It's about being who you are," Sarah finished. "I know, Dad. That's what makes it special." The shop phone rang again, and Sarah went to answer it, leaving Tom to his thoughts. Through the open door, he could see Mrs. Henderson's Buick pulling into the lot, and behind it, two more cars he didn't recognize. The day was only beginning, and already it felt different from any other he could remember. In the quiet of her Victorian home, Eleanor Thompson sat at her antique writing desk, a worn deed box open before her. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, highlighting the brass nameplate that read, "Herbert and Eleanor Thompson." Her fingers traced the embossed letters as memories washed over her like gentle waves. Inside the box lay the carefully preserved documents of a lifetime, property deeds, savings bonds, insurance policies and bank statements, all testament to decades of careful planning with Herbert. They'd lived modestly, saving everything they could, always with the thought that someday their wealth would serve a greater purpose. "We may not have children of our own," Herbert had often said, "but we can still leave a legacy of kindness." Eleanor pulled out the property deed to their home, the paper yellowed but still crisp. The house had been in Herbert's family for 3 generations, its value increasing steadily over the years. The well in the backyard was marked specifically in the property description, a detail Herbert had insisted upon, knowing its historical significance to the town. Beneath the deed lay their investment portfolio, managed conservatively but successfully by Herbert until his passing. Eleanor had maintained it just as he'd taught her, watching the numbers grow while living on little more than her teacher's pension. Few in town knew of their wealth. They'd preferred it that way. She opened her checkbook, noting the substantial balance. The previous night's kindness from Tom Wilson had stirred something in her, a certainty about what Herbert would have wanted them to do with their fortune. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in, Martha," she called, recognizing her lawyer's distinctive pattern. Martha Chen, sister to the newspaper reporter and the town's most respected attorney, entered carrying a leather briefcase. "Eleanor," she said warmly, "Mary told me about what happened last night, about Tom Wilson and the well." Eleanor smiled, gesturing to a chair. "Your sister's article captured it beautifully. But there's more to the story, so much more." She turned to face her old friend fully. "Do you remember what Herbert always said about money? That it's like water." Martha replied, setting down her briefcase. "It does the most good when it flows freely." "Exactly." Eleanor pulled out a sheet of paper and began writing in her elegant hand. "I've made a decision, Martha. I need your help to make it legally binding." Martha listened intently as Eleanor outlined her plan, her eyes widening slightly. "Are you certain about this? It's a substantial gift." "I've never been more certain," Eleanor said firmly. "I've watched Tom Wilson for years, you know, not just last night, but all the times he's helped others without expectation of return. The way he's raised Sarah alone, encouraging her dreams despite their struggles." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "He reminds me so much of Herbert. That same quiet integrity, that dedication to doing what's right." Martha began pulling documents from her briefcase. "You'll need to update your will, transfer the property deed, set up the trust." She paused, looking at her old friend carefully. "Have you considered telling him first?" Eleanor shook her head, a hint of her old teaching authority in her voice. "Some lessons are best learned through experience. Herbert taught me that too." She reached for another paper from the deed box, a faded photograph of a much younger Eleanor and Herbert standing proudly before the well. "Tom gave me back more than just running water last night. He restored a piece of Herbert I thought I'd lost." As they worked through the afternoon, drawing up the necessary documents, Eleanor shared more of her observations about Tom and Sarah. She spoke of piano lessons where Sarah would talk about her dreams of engineering, of watching Tom work late, into the night to help neighbors in need, of seeing the same spirit of service in them that she and Herbert had tried to embody in their own lives. "Herbert would have loved to see this," she said softly, signing the last document with a steady hand. "He always said the right heart would find its way to our door someday." Martha gathered the papers carefully. "I'll have these filed first. On thing tomorrow. Are you sure you want to make the announcement at the council meeting tonight?" Eleanor nodded, closing the deed box with a gentle click. "It's time for the water to flow where it's needed most." She smiled, remembering Tom's refused payment the night before. Sometimes the greatest gifts come to those who never think to ask for them. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the shop windows as Tom wiped grease from his hands, preparing to close up for the day. The formal letter had arrived by special courier an hour ago, the heavy cream envelope bearing Eleanor Thompson's precise handwriting. It sat unopened on his workbench, somehow managing to look both elegant and intimidating against the scattered tools and repair manuals. "Are you going to open it, or just stare at it all day?" Sarah asked, emerging from the office with her backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd been watching him eye the envelope nervously for the past hour. Tom picked up the letter, the paper thick and expensive under his fingers. "Mrs. Thompson's stationery," he mused. "She used to send notes home after your piano lessons on paper just like this." The seal broke with a crisp sound, revealing a single sheet covered in Eleanor's distinctive penmanship. "Dear Tom, your kindness last night has prompted me to share something of great importance with you. Please attend tonight's town council meeting at 7 p.m. What I have to say will affect not only your future, but Sarah's as well. With deepest gratitude, Eleanor Thompson P.S. The well is running beautifully, just as Herbert would have wanted." Sarah read over his shoulder, her expression curious. "What do you think she means about our future?" "I'm not sure," Tom admitted, carefully folding the letter and slipping it into his shirt pocket. But Mrs. Thompson isn't one for dramatic gestures without reason. The shop phone rang, startling them both. It was Betty from the diner again. "Tom, is it true Eleanor Thompson's asked you to the council meeting tonight? Mary Chen says something big is coming, but she won't spill the details." Before Tom could answer, another call beeped through, then another. Word was spreading through town with the speed only small communities can manage. Each caller had a different theory about what Eleanor might be planning. "Maybe she's nominating you for Citizen of the Year," Sarah suggested, counting off possibilities on her fingers. "Or starting a scholarship fund? She always said education was important." Tom shook his head, remembering Eleanor's tears by the well, the weight of history in her words about Herbert. There had been something in her voice then, something more than simple gratitude for a repair job. The bell above the shop door chimed as Jenny McCarthy burst in, still wearing her hospital scrubs. "Mum sent me to remind you about tonight," she said breathlessly. "The whole town's talking about it. Dad says he hasn't seen this much excitement since they found that time capsule under the old schoolhouse." Tom looked around his shop, at the work still waiting to be done, at the bills stacked neatly in Sarah's handwriting, at the photo of Claire smiling down from the wall. Whatever Eleanor Thompson had planned, it felt like standing on the edge of something momentous. "Sarah," he said slowly, "would you mind running home and getting my good jacket? The one your mother always made me wear to parent-teacher conferences?" Sarah's eyes lit up. She knew as well as he did that the jacket hadn't left its hanger since Claire's funeral. "The blue one, with the elbow patches? That's the one. If Mrs. Thompson's gone to all this trouble, least I can do is show up properly dressed." After Sarah left, Tom stood in the quiet shop, Eleanor's letter a tangible weight against his heart. Through the window, he could see people gathering in small groups. Along Main Street, their animated conversations visible even from a distance. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for whatever revelation the evening would bring. He thought about Eleanor Thompson, about the dignity with which she'd carried her solitude since Herbert's passing, about the way she'd spoken of chosen family by the light of that old brass lantern. Something was shifting in the fabric of their small community, and somehow, improbably, he found himself at the center of it. The council meeting was 2 hours away. Tom began closing up the shop with methodical care, each familiar action a small anchor against the tide of speculation rising around him. Whatever Eleanor Thompson had planned, he would face it as he faced everything else, with honest work behind him and hope for his daughter's future before him. Eleanor sat in her parlor, a weathered photo album open on her lap, waiting for Tom's arrival before the council meeting. Each page held carefully preserved moments of her life with Herbert: their wedding day, the opening of her piano studio, Herbert teaching at the high school, the two of them standing proudly by the well on the day it was completed. Her fingers lingered on a particular photograph, one taken nearly 20 years ago. In it, Claire Wilson sat at Eleanor's piano, young Sarah perched on her lap, their hands together on the keys. Tom stood in the background, watching his wife and daughter with such tender pride it made Eleanor's heart ache even now. The doorbell chimed, and Eleanor closed the album gently. Through the front window, she could see Tom on her porch, wearing a well-preserved blue jacket that spoke of special occasions long past. "Come in, Tom," she called, noting how he removed his cap and smoothed his hair, small gestures of respect that reminded her so much of Herbert. "Sarah's not with you?" "She's meeting me at the council hall," Tom replied, stepping into the familiar parlor where his daughter had spent so many afternoons practicing scales. "I hope I'm not too early." "You're right on time." Eleanor gestured to the chair across. From her, the photo album still in her lap. "I wanted a moment to show you something before we head to the meeting." Tom sat, his eyes drawn to the album. Eleanor opened it to the photograph she'd been studying, watching as recognition and emotion played across his face. "Claire," he whispered, leaning forward, "I'd forgotten about this day. Sarah had just started lessons." She was so proud when Sarah picked up that simple melody, Eleanor remembered, her voice soft with memory. "Claire told me afterward that She'd never seen Sarah so determined to learn something. She turned another page, revealing more moments, Claire bringing Sarah to lessons, staying afterward for tea, the two women talking while Sarah practiced. "Your wife understood something vital about teaching," Eleanor said. "She knew it wasn't just about the music. It was about building confidence, about showing children they could master anything if they approached it with patience and dedication." Tom's fingers hovered over the images, not quite touching. "Claire always said you were more than just Sarah's piano teacher. She called you a mentor, someone who saw the potential in others." Eleanor smiled, remembering those conversations over tea. Claire had that same gift. She could see the best in people, nurture it. Herbert was like that too. She paused, gathering her thoughts. When we lost Herbert, Claire was one of the few who knew exactly what to say, or when to say nothing at all. "Just sit with me in the quiet and understand." "She learned that from experience," Tom said softly, "after her own parents passed." Eleanor nodded, turning to another photograph, Herbert demonstrating the well's mechanism to a group of fascinated students. "Loss shapes us, Tom, but it's what we build from that loss that defines us." She met his eyes directly. "I've watched you these past 12 years, raising Sarah alone, helping others even when you were struggling yourself. You've built something remarkable from your loss." She closed the album carefully, setting it aside. "Herbert and I never had children of our own, but we had our students, our neighbors, our community. We believed that family isn't just about blood. It's about the connections we choose to nurture." Through the window they could see people beginning to make their way toward the council hall, the evening sun casting long shadows down Main Street. Eleanor stood, smoothing her dress with practiced grace. "Before we go, Tom, I want you to know something. What's going to happen tonight? It's not just about repaying your kindness with the well. It's about recognizing the kind of person you are, the values you've passed on to Sarah, values that Claire would be so proud to see." Tom stood as well, emotion making his voice rough. "Mrs. Thompson, Eleanor," she corrected gently. "After tonight, I think we can dispense with formalities." They walked together toward the front door, passing the piano where so many young hands had learned to make music. Eleanor paused, picking up a small wrapped package from the entry table. "One more thing," she said, pressing it into Tom's hands. "Open it after the meeting. It's something Herbert would have wanted you to have." As they stepped out into the evening air, Eleanor took one last look at her home, at the well standing faithful in the gathering dusk. Whatever doubts she might have had about her decision had vanished, replaced by a certainty that would have made Herbert proud. Sometimes, she thought, the family you choose is exactly the family you need. The council chamber hummed with whispered conversations as Tom and Eleanor entered. Sarah was already there, seated beside Jenny McCarthy in the front row. She'd changed into the blue dress Claire had bought her for special occasions, the one that was starting to show its age, but still carried echoes of her mother's taste. Mayor Richardson stood at the podium, shuffling through papers with Martha Chen beside her. The town's lawyer caught Eleanor's eye and nodded slightly. Everything was prepared. Eleanor squeezed the leather portfolio in her hands, containing documents that would change lives forever. "If everyone could please take their seats," the mayor began, her voice cutting through the murmur. "We're here tonight at the request of Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, who has an announcement of significance to our community." Tom sat beside Sarah, who slipped her hand into his. Eleanor made her way to the podium with the measured grace of someone who had spent decades commanding attention in a classroom. The portfolio she placed before her seemed to carry the weight of years in its leather-bound pages. "Thank you all for coming," Eleanor began, her voice clear and strong. "Especially you, Tom Wilson. Last night you did more than fix an old well. You reminded me of something my late husband Herbert always believed, that the true measure of wealth isn't in what we keep, but in what we give away." She opened the portfolio, removing a set of documents bound in blue legal covers. Herbert and I were blessed with more than we needed in this life. We lived modestly, saved carefully, always knowing that someday we would find the right purpose for what we'd accumulated. Tom felt Sarah's hand tighten in his as Eleanor continued. In you, Tom Wilson, I see the same qualities that made Herbert the man he was. Integrity, generosity, and an understanding that community is built one act of kindness at a time. Martha Chen approached the podium, taking the documents from Eleanor. These papers, Eleanor explained, represent the entirety of my estate, this house, my savings, and all associated properties. The well that you so kindly repaired last night sits on land that has been in Herbert's family for generations. She turned to face Tom directly. I am transferring everything to you, Tom. The house, the savings, all of it. My only condition is that the well remains accessible to any neighbor in need, just as it has been for over a century. The room fell silent. Tom felt the world tilt slightly, Sarah's grip on his hand the only thing anchoring him to reality. Mrs. Thompson, he managed. I can't possibly. You can and you will, Eleanor said firmly, the same tone she'd used to correct countless wrong notes over the years. Herbert and I never had children of our own, but we always believed family is something you can choose. Last night, watching you work by lantern light, refusing payment for helping an old woman in distress, I knew I'd found the son Herbert, and I never had. Martha Chen stepped forward, her voice professionally calm, but her eyes bright. The documents are legally binding, Tom. Mrs. Thompson has set up a trust that will cover property taxes and maintenance costs. There's also a separate educational fund for Sarah. Sarah's breath caught audibly. Eleanor smiled at her. My dear, your mother used to tell me about your dreams during our talks after your lessons. She would be so proud to see you pursuing engineering. This will ensure you can attend any university you choose without burden. Tom stood slowly, his legs unsteady. This is too much. Your generosity is overwhelming, but surely there are others, more deserving. There aren't, Eleanor interrupted gently. And before you protest further, know that this isn't just about rewarding kindness. It's about preserving legacy. Herbert's father built that well to serve the community. His son maintained it with the same purpose. Now it's your turn to be its keeper, to ensure its water continues to flow freely for those in need. She walked down from the podium to stand before Tom, taking his rough mechanic's hands in her softer ones. Accept this gift, not just for yourself, but for Sarah, for the community, and for the memory of those who taught us both the value of giving without expectation of return. The legal papers sat before them, waiting. Martha Chen held out a pen. In that moment, Tom thought of Claire, of her insistence that kindness always found its way home. He thought of his daughter's dreams, of Stanford acceptance letters and the weight of impossible tuition. He thought of Eleanor and Herbert Thompson, choosing to live simply so they could give greatly. With hands that trembled slightly, he reached for the pen. Later that night, Sarah sat cross-legged on her bed, writing in the journal her mother had given her on her 13th birthday. The leather-bound book had become her confidant over the years, its pages filled with dreams, fears, and now, the incredible events of the evening. Her pen moved swiftly across the paper. Dear Mom, everything changed tonight. Remember Mrs. Thompson, my piano teacher, the one you used to have tea with after my lessons? She just gave Dad her entire estate, her house, her savings, everything. She said it was because of his kindness, because he fixed her well without asking for payment. But I think it's more than that. I think she saw in Dad what you always saw in him, Dad struggling with it. I can see it in the way he keeps pacing the apartment, in how he holds the house keys Mrs. Thompson gave him, like they might burn his fingers. He hasn't said more than a dozen words since we left the council meeting. I wish you were here to help him understand that it's okay to receive something this big, that sometimes the universe has a way of balancing things out. Through her open door, Sarah could hear her father's footsteps in the living room, the familiar creak of floorboards marking his path. She continued writing, "The educational trust she set up means I can go to Stanford without Dad having to worry. Remember how you always said I could be anything I wanted? How you started that college fund when I was just a baby?" Mrs. Thompson knew about that. She told me tonight that you used to talk about my future during those afternoon teas, but Dad's having trouble accepting it all. He keeps saying it's too much, that we don't deserve such generosity. I tried telling him what you always said about kindness coming back around, but he just got that faraway look in his eyes, the one he gets when he's missing you most. The pacing in the living room stopped. Sarah heard the soft clink of metal, probably Dad turning Mrs. Thompson's house keys over in his hands again. She wrote faster. "Jenny McCarthy came over after the meeting. She said the whole town's talking about it, but not in a gossipy way. They're saying it's like something out of a fairy tale, but I think it's more like one of those moments you used to talk about, when life suddenly shows you that all the small good things you do matter more than you knew." Mrs. Thompson gave Dad something else, too, a small wrapped package she said was from Mr. Thompson. Dad hasn't opened it yet. It's sitting on the kitchen table, next to the keys and the legal papers. I think he's afraid of what else he might have to accept tonight. Sarah paused, listening to her father's movements. The apartment felt too small suddenly, like it was already becoming a memory. She thought about Mrs. Thompson's Victorian house, with its grand piano in the parlor and the historical well in the backyard. Their lives were about to change in ways she could barely comprehend. "I'm excited, Mom, but scared too. It's like standing on the edge of something huge. Dad taught me that when you fix things, you have to understand how all the parts work together. But this feels bigger than any repair job he's ever tackled. He's always been the one giving help, not receiving it. I don't think he knows how to be on this side of kindness. Remember how he couldn't accept casseroles from the neighbors right after you passed? How he kept saying we were managing just fine. Mrs. Thompson must have known this would be hard for him. She had her lawyer explain everything so carefully, like she was trying to make it impossible for Dad to say no without disappointing the whole town. "The thing is, Mum, I think this is exactly what you would have wanted for us. Not just the money, for college or the beautiful house, but this reminder that Dad's quiet goodness matters, that someone else sees him the way you always did." A soft knock interrupted her writing. Dad stood in the doorway, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "Writing to your mom?" he asked softly, recognizing the journal. Sarah nodded, making room for him on the bed. Trying to make sense of it all. He sat beside her, the springs creaking slightly. What would she say about all this, do you think? Sarah closed the journal, keeping her finger between the pages. She'd probably say that sometimes the biggest acts of kindness are in letting others be kind to you. Her father's smile was small but real, the first she'd seen since the meeting. "When did you get so wise?" "I had good teachers," Sarah replied, leaning against his shoulder like she used to when she was small. "Both of them." The following morning, Tom and Sarah stood in Eleanor's, now their parlor, surrounded by generations of Thompson family history. Eleanor had insisted they begin moving in immediately, saying there was no sense in waiting when Sarah's college. Preparations needed attention. She'd taken a small apartment above the library, leaving them to explore their new home. While Sarah investigated the kitchen, Tom found himself drawn to Herbert's study, a room that still held the lingering scent of pipe tobacco and old books. A stack of letters sat on the massive oak desk, tied with a faded blue ribbon. A note in Eleanor's handwriting lay on top. "Tom, I think you should read these. They'll help explain why it had to be you." The first letter was dated 25 years ago, written in a hand that made Tom's heart stop. Claire's distinctive penmanship flowed across the yellowed page. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, thank you for your kindness during Mother's funeral. The piece you played was beautiful. She would have loved knowing her favorite piano teacher performed it for her one last time. I've been thinking about what you said, about how teaching music is really about teaching life. Mother always said the same thing about nursing." Tom's hands trembled as he unfolded the next letter. "Dear Eleanor, You insist I must call you that. Now, the wedding music was perfect. Tom doesn't know you helped me choose it. He thinks I just happened to pick his mother's favorite hymn. Somehow you knew exactly how to help me honor both our mothers that day. I hope I can be half the teacher to others that you've been to me. Letter after letter chronicled a relationship that went far deeper than piano lessons and afternoon teas. Claire had been writing to Eleanor since she was a teenager, seeking guidance long before she met Tom, before Sarah was born, before cancer rewrote their story. The last letter was dated just weeks before Claire's passing. Dearest Eleanor, the doctors say it won't be long now. There's so much I need to say, so much I want to prepare for. Tom will need help, though he'll never ask for it. He's like Herbert that way. So used to being the one who fixes everything for everyone else. Sarah's growing so fast. I see in her the same spark you noticed in me all those years ago. Promise me you'll keep teaching her, not just music, but all the things you taught me about strength and grace and choosing joy, even in hard times. I'm not afraid, Eleanor. You and Herbert showed me that a life well lived echoes long after the music ends. Watch over my family when I'm gone. Help them remember that love doesn't end, it just changes form. All my love, Claire. A soft gasp from the doorway made Tom look up. Eleanor stood there, Sarah beside her, both carrying boxes of old sheet music. I wondered when you'd find those, Eleanor said softly. Claire was more than just a student to me. She was the daughter Herbert and I never had when she married. You, Tom, we felt as though we'd gained a son as well. Sarah moved to her father's side, picking up one of the letters. Mom wrote these, Eleanor nodded. For over 20 years. She came to me for piano lessons after her mother died, but she stayed for much more than music. We shared a bond that transcended teacher and student. When she got sick, Eleanor's voice caught. She made me promise to look after you both. The afternoon teas, Tom said slowly, memories shifting into new patterns. The extra piano lessons you gave Sarah even when we couldn't always pay. The casseroles that appeared on our porch that first year after. Claire knew you'd never accept direct help, Eleanor said. You were too proud, too determined to handle everything yourself. She asked me to be subtle, to find ways to support you that you couldn't refuse. Sarah was reading through the letters, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. Mom knew, she whispered. She knew Mrs. Thompson would be here for us. Eleanor moved to the desk, opening a drawer to reveal a small wooden box. Claire and I had a tradition. Every Christmas, we'd write down our hopes for the coming year and seal them in envelopes. This was her last one. She handed the box to Tom. She asked me to give it to you when the time was right. Inside, Claire's final Christmas wish was written. In her familiar hand, let them find the family they need, even if it's not the one they're looking for. Tom looked around the study, at the letters that revealed years of hidden connection, at his daughter clutching pieces of her mother's heart in written words, at Eleanor, who had kept a promise for 12 long years. The room felt different now. Not just Herbert's space, but a bridge between past and future, between what was lost and what had been found. Claire orchestrated this, he said softly, understanding finally dawning. Even then, she was making sure we'd be taken care of. Eleanor smiled through her tears. She knew someday you'd fix my well, Tom. She knew your kindness would give me the perfect reason to keep my promise to her. Sarah hugged the letters to her chest. Mum always said everything happens for a reason. Yes, Eleanor agreed, looking around the study that held so many secrets, so many layers of love and legacy. And sometimes the best reasons take years to understand. A set of keys lay spread across the Thompson house's kitchen table like a metallic roadmap to their new life. Each one had been meticulously labeled in Herbert's precise engineering handwriting. Front door, back garden, well house, studio, workshop. Tom picked them up one by one, their weight familiar yet strange in his hands. The workshop key is the one you'll want first, Eleanor said, sipping tea from one of her fine china cups. Herbert's tools are all still there. He'd want Them used, not gathering dust. Sarah sat beside her, making notes in a fresh notebook. Lists of what needed to be moved, what could be donated, what memories they'd carry from their small apartment above the garage. The pages were filled with her practical solutions to this overwhelming change. "Dad," she said, looking up from her. "Planning. Jenny's dad offered his truck for moving the bigger stuff, and Mrs. Henderson says she'll help pack up Mum's china." She paused, watching her father's face carefully. "If you're ready for that." Tom nodded slowly, running his thumb over the workshop key. Claire's china had stayed wrapped and boxed since her passing, too precious to use, too painful to give away. But now, somehow, the thought of seeing it in this kitchen, mixed with Eleanor's well-loved pieces, felt right. "Eleanor," he said, still struggling to use her first name. "Are you sure about the timeline? There's no rush." "There's every rush," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "Sarah needs to prepare for Stanford. You need to set up your new workspace, and I need to know this house will be filled with life again before I leave for my sisters in Florida." The mention of Stanford made Tom glance at the thick envelope propped against the fruit bowl. Inside was everything they needed to secure Sarah's place: acceptance forms, housing requests, and the financial documents that no longer filled him with dread. "About the garage," he started, but Eleanor was already pulling out blueprints from a folder, Herbert's original drawings for the property. Herbert designed the workshop to be easily converted into an automotive repair space. She explained, spreading the plans across the table. He was always tinkering with engines himself, said there was poetry in a well-tuned motor. Sarah leaned forward, her engineer's mind already analyzing the possibilities. "Look, Dad, with these dimensions, you could fit 2 lifts, and this side area could be a waiting room." Tom studied the blueprints, recognizing the elegant efficiency of Herbert's design. The workshop was actually larger than his current garage, with better ventilation and natural light. A separate entrance from the street would allow customers to come and go without disturbing the main house. "Your current lease at the garage runs out in 2 months, Eleanor reminded him. "Perfect timing to make the transition. And think how much you'll save without rent to pay." The practical sense of it all was undeniable, yet Tom still felt the weight of such massive change. He picked up another key, this one to the well house. "Herbert kept detailed records of the well's maintenance in there," Eleanor said softly. "Daily water quality readings, repair logs, everything you'll need to know to be its keeper." Sarah had moved to the window, looking out at the well that had started all of this. "Mom would love knowing we'll be living here," she said. "Remember how she used to say Mrs. Thompson's garden was like something from a storybook?" The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows, catching the keys on the table and making them shine. Tom thought about Claire's letters upstairs, about her long connection to this house and the woman who'd been so much more than just her piano teacher. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small, leather-bound book, a ledger from the look of it. Herbert kept track of everyone who ever used the well, not to count debts but to celebrate connection. He believed every bucket of water drawn created a thread in the community's fabric. Tom opened the ledger carefully. Pages of names filled the book, each entry accompanied by a date and brief note. Martinez family, summer drought of 82. Wilson's first visit, helped with stuck pump, refused payment, type of man we need more of in town. The last entry was in Eleanor's hand, dated the night Tom had fixed the well. Tom Wilson mended more than just the mechanism. Claire would be proud. "I thought you might like to continue the tradition," Eleanor said, watching as Tom ran his fingers over Herbert's familiar signature at the front of the book. Sarah had returned to her notebook, but now she was sketching something new, a design for a small sign to hang by the well. "Free water for neighbors in need," she murmured as she drew, "in memory of Herbert Thompson and Claire Wilson." Tom felt something shift inside him, like a gear finally clicking into place. The keys, the blueprints, the ledger, they weren't just objects being passed down, but tools for building a new kind of legacy, one that honored both the family they'd lost and the family they'd found. 2 months, he said finally, picking up the workshop key again. We can be ready in 2 months. Herbert Thompson's blueprint for the workshop transformation lay stretched across the old drafting table, its blue lines glowing in the afternoon light. Tom and Mr. Peterson, the town's building inspector, stood studying the detailed drawings. While Sarah pointed out her proposed modifications, Herbert thought of everything, Mr. Peterson mused, tracing the ventilation system with a practiced finger. These air-handling calculations, he must have been planning for an automotive shop all along. The blueprint showed more than just measurements and specifications. In the margins, Herbert had sketched small notes about community needs. Space for emergency repairs, waiting area with view of garden, easy access for elderly customers. Even years ago, he had been thinking about how the space could serve others. Sarah's additions make good sense, Mr. Peterson continued, nodding at her neat annotations in red ink. The extra electrical capacity for modern diagnostic equipment, the expanded tool storage. You've got your mother's eye for detail, young lady. Sarah beamed at the comparison, adding another note about LED lighting placement. She'd spent hours studying Herbert's original design, finding ways to honor his vision while upgrading for current technology. What about the well access? Tom asked, pointing to the pathway that connected the workshop to the well house. I want to make sure customers can still reach it easily. Already thought of that, Dad. Sarah flipped to her supplementary drawings. We can create a covered walkway here with motion sensor lights for evening access. Mrs. McCarthy suggested adding a bench too, since some folks might need to rest while carrying water. The door chimed as Jenny McCarthy herself walked in, carrying a tray of coffee cups from the diner. Mum sent these over. She said anyone planning the future of Wilson's Auto deserves proper caffeine. Behind her came Eleanor, who had been meeting with Martha Chen about the final property transfers. The paperwork's all set, she announced. You can begin renovations as soon as you're ready. Tom accepted a coffee, its warmth steadying his hands as he looked around the space that would soon be transformed. Herbert's old workbenches lined the walls, their sturdy construction a testament to his craftsmanship. Tools hung in careful order, waiting to be joined by Tom's own well-worn implements. The whole town's talking about it, Jenny said, perching on a nearby stool. Dad says combining Wilson's Auto with the Thompson place is like watching 2 pieces of town history come together. Eleanor moved to the blueprint, her fingers finding the garden sketches in the margins. Herbert always said this place was meant for more than just his tinkering. He believed spaces, like people, have their own destinies. Sarah had begun listing equipment they'd need to transfer from the old shop, her practical mind already organizing. The transition, but she paused, looking up suddenly. What about the piano, Mrs. Thompson? Surely you'll want that in your new apartment? Eleanor shook her head, smiling. That piano belongs here, dear. In fact, I was thinking the waiting area might be the perfect place for it. Nothing makes time pass more pleasantly than a bit of music. The idea sparked something in Tom's memory. Claire used to play for customers sometimes, when repairs ran. Long said it helped them feel less anxious about their cars. And now Sarah can play while she's home from college, Eleanor added, her eyes twinkling. Keep the tradition alive. Mr. Peterson rolled up the blueprints carefully, securing them with brass clasps. Well, everything looks up to code. Herbert's design actually exceeds current requirements in most areas. I'll have the permits ready by next week. As the others discussed timeline details, Tom found himself drawn to Herbert's old workbench. The surface was worn smooth by years of projects, each scratch and stain telling its own story. A half-finished repair still sat in the corner, an antique clock movement that Herbert must have been working on before he passed. Tom picked up the delicate mechanism, recognizing the careful organization of parts laid out for reassembly. Without thinking, his fingers began the familiar work of restoration, following the path Herbert had begun. Eleanor appeared at his shoulder, watching as he worked. He would have liked this, she said softly, seeing his space continue its purpose of fixing broken things and helping others. Sarah joined them, adding another note to her ever-growing list. We should hang both signs, she suggested. Wilson's Auto and Thompson Workshop. Show people it's a continuation, not a replacement. Tom set the clock parts down gently, already planning how he'd complete Herbert's unfinished repair. A continuation, he repeated, liking the word. That's exactly what Claire would have called it. Through the windows, they could see neighbors, walking past, slowing to peer in with undisguised interest. The well stood in its eternal vigil, while Herbert's garden bloomed with autumn colors. Everything was changing, yet somehow everything important remained the same. The desire to help, to fix, to make things whole again. The autumn morning dawned clear and crisp, sunlight catching on the newly polished brass bucket that the town council had commissioned for the well. The craftsman had outdone himself. The bucket gleamed like liquid gold, Herbert Thompson's original. Design replicated in every detail, with one addition, a simple inscription that read, "In honor of those who give freely, that others might drink deeply." The bucket stood on a white-clothed table in Eleanor's, soon-to-be Tom and Sarah's garden, surrounded by flowers from every neighbor's yard. The whole town seemed to have turned out for what they were calling the passing of the well ceremony, though it was really much more than that. Mayor Richardson stood near the well, official documents in hand, while Martha Chen arranged the final papers for signing. Eleanor sat in Herbert's old garden chair, wearing her best dress and a peaceful smile. Tom and Sarah stood together, both in their Sunday finest, Sarah wearing one of Claire's preserved silk scarves around her shoulders. "Friends and neighbors," the mayor began, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "We're here today to witness something extraordinary, not just the transfer of property, but the passing on of a legacy that has served this community for generations." The brass bucket caught the light, sending warm reflections dancing across the gathering. Betty from the diner dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Mr. Peterson stood straight and proud, like he was back in his military days. Jenny McCarthy held her phone up, recording everything for her social media channels, where the story of Tom and the well had already touched thousands. "The Thompson well has been more than just a source of water," the mayor continued. "It has been a symbol of community, of giving without expectation of return. Herbert Thompson maintained it as a public trust. Eleanor Thompson protected it as a community treasure. And now Tom Wilson, who proved his worthiness through an act of simple kindness, will become its new keeper." Eleanor rose slowly, moving to stand beside the brass bucket. "Before we proceed with the formal transfer, I have something to say." She lifted the bucket, its surface reflecting the faces of those gathered. "This is more than just a ceremonial gift. This bucket was cast from Herbert's original designs, found in his workshop papers. Tom," she turned to face him, "Herbert believed that pure water, freely given, could wash away the boundaries between neighbors. This bucket represents that belief and our faith that you will carry it forward." Tom stepped forward to accept the bucket, its weight solid and real in his hands. He could see the craftsmanship that had gone into it, the care taken to honor Herbert's vision. Sarah moved to stand beside him, her hand resting on the bucket's gleaming surface. "I promise," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion, "that this well will remain what it has always been, a source of help for any neighbor in need." Martha Chen approached with the papers, her usual professional demeanor softened by the moment's significance. "The documents are ready for final signatures," she said, laying them out on the white-clothed table. As Tom and Eleanor signed, Sarah watched the gathered community, faces she'd known all her life, people who had helped shape her world. Mrs. Henderson, who had taught her to bake cookies using her mother's recipe. Mr. Peterson, who had given her first lessons in mechanical drawing. Jenny McCarthy, born on a night when her father's kindness had made all the difference. Eleanor signed the last page with a flourish, then handed the pen to Tom, His signature, strong and clear, marked more than just a legal transfer. It was a promise to the community, to Eleanor, to Herbert's memory, and to Claire's enduring legacy of caring for others. The mayor stepped forward again, raising her voice to carry to the back of the crowd. By the power vested in me by the town of Millbrook, I hereby officially recognize the transfer of the Thompson property, including the historic well, to Tom Wilson and his heirs. May it continue to serve our community for generations to come. A cheer went up from the gathered neighbors. Betty and her staff began setting up tables for the celebration feast. The brass bucket caught the sun once more, its glow seeming to bless the proceedings with a light of its own. Eleanor stood facing the crowd. "There's one more thing," she said, her voice carrying years of teaching authority. "Tom, Sarah, would you join me by the well?" They moved to stand beside her, the brass bucket between them. Eleanor placed one hand on the well's stone rim, the other holding something small wrapped in silk. "Herbert always said that some ceremonies need a physical remembrance," she said, unwrapping the silk to reveal an ancient iron key. "This is the original key to the well house, forged by Herbert's grandfather. It's been passed down through generations of keepers. Now it belongs to you." As Tom accepted the key, someone in the crowd began to sing, an old hymn about wells and living water that Claire used to play on Sunday mornings. Other voices joined in, the harmony rising like the water from the depths below, carrying with it all the hopes and histories of a community bound together by simple acts of kindness. The first family portrait hung slightly crooked on the parlor wall, but nobody moved to straighten it. The photograph, taken just after the ceremony, captured a moment of pure joy. Tom and Sarah flanking Eleanor on the well's stone rim, the brass bucket gleaming between them, all three wearing smiles that reached their eyes. Behind them, the Victorian house stood proud, its windows reflecting the autumn sunshine, while Herbert's garden bloomed in vibrant farewell to summer. 1 week into their new life, the house was slowly transforming. Sarah's engineering textbooks mixed with Eleanor's sheet music on the library shelves. Tom's father's toolbox found a home in Herbert's workshop, their collected tools mingling like old friends. Claire's china graced the kitchen cabinets alongside. Eleanor's teacups, their patterns complementing each other as if they'd always been meant to share the space. "The piano needs tuning," Sarah called from the parlor, where she sat picking out a simple melody, one of the first pieces she'd learned under Eleanor's guidance. "And I think I remember enough to play at the grand opening." Tom looked up from where he was installing new shelving in the workshop. The space was coming together faster than he'd expected, the renovation plans flowing smoothly thanks to Herbert's meticulous design and Sarah's modern updates. The first car lift would be delivered tomorrow. "Already got the piano tuner scheduled," he replied. "Eleanor recommended him, said he's been caring for that Steinway since before you were born." Through the workshop's new windows, he could see neighbors stopping by the well throughout the day. Each visitor paused to admire the brass bucket, now permanently mounted on a custom stand beside the well house. Some left notes in Herbert's ledger, continuing the tradition of recording not just water drawn, but connections forged. The sound of a car pulling up brought Tom to the workshop door. Jenny McCarthy emerged from her father's truck, carrying a large framed photograph. "Mom found this while cleaning the attic," she said, unwrapping the frame carefully. "Thought you might want it for the waiting room." The photograph showed Main Street, circa 1960, with Herbert Thompson's father standing proudly beside the newly renovated well. Behind him, a young Herbert worked on what appeared to be an early version of the pulley system. In the background, barely visible, was a familiar red toolbox sitting on the well's stone rim. "Is that—" Tom started, looking closer. "Your dad's toolbox," Jenny confirmed. "Mom says your father used to help Herbert with mechanical projects when they were young. They never made a big deal about it, but they worked together often." Sarah appeared in the doorway, drawn by their conversation. So Dad's connection to this place goes back even further than we thought. This whole town is connected by threads we're only just discovering, Jenny said, helping Tom hang the photograph. Mom also wanted me to remind you about the grand opening next week. She's planning something special for the refreshments. Tom stepped back to study the photograph's placement. It looked right at home, among the other pieces of history they'd been slowly collecting. Herbert's engineering certificates, Eleanor's concert programs, Claire's nursing diploma. The waiting room was becoming a gallery of community memories. "Oh," Sarah exclaimed suddenly, "that reminds me, the sign is ready." She pulled out her phone, showing them the proof from the sign maker. The design merged both legacies seamlessly. Wilson's Auto, a Thompson Workshop community service since 1922. Well water available, all welcome. Perfect timing, Tom said, checking his watch. The first customer appointment is Monday morning. Mrs. Henderson insisted on being first in line, said she wouldn't trust her Buick to anyone else. Jenny laughed. The appointment book is already full for the first month. Word's gotten around about the renovation. People are calling it the miracle on Main Street, the mechanic who fixed a well and found a legacy. Sarah moved to the workshop. Windows, looking out at the well where everything had changed. A young mother was drawing water, her small daughter watching the bucket rise with wide-eyed wonder. The brass surface caught the light, sending warm reflections across the garden. "You know what Mom would say about all this?" Sarah asked softly. Tom joined her at the window, watching the mother show her daughter how to work the pulley system. "That some things are meant to be that, and that love finds ways to keep giving," Sarah replied, leaning against her father's shoulder, "through wells and wrenches and whatever else it takes." The workshop smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Tomorrow, they would begin moving the heavy equipment from the old garage. Next week, the first customers would arrive. But for now, Tom stood with his daughter, watching the well serve its purpose just as it had for generations, bringing people together, one bucket at a time. The photograph on the wall seemed to approve, those long-ago figures standing proud, beside the same well that had brought them all to this moment. Herbert and Eleanor Thompson, Claire's guiding hand, Tom's father with his red toolbox, all the threads of past and present woven together into something new and wonderful and right. 1 year later, water from the Thompson-Wilson well sparkled in the summer sunshine as it filled yet another bucket. Tom paused in his work on Mrs. Henderson's faithful Buick to watch Sarah demonstrate the pulley system to a group of wide-eyed engineering students, her classmates from Stanford, home with her for the summer break. The mechanical advantage created by this double pulley design, she explained, her voice carrying the same teaching cadence that Eleanor had once used for piano lessons, allows for efficient water extraction while minimizing physical strain. My grandfather, she caught herself with a smile, looking toward Tom. They'd started calling Herbert that sometime during the past year, and somehow it felt right. My grandfather designed it to serve the community for generations. The workshop hummed with activity behind them. 2 local high school students served as apprentices now, learning the trade, just as Tom had once learned from his father. The waiting room piano played softly, Eleanor giving lessons during her weekly visits home from Florida, her retired life as full of music as ever. The ledger book sat open on its special stand near the well, its newer pages filling up just as steadily as the older ones had. But now the entries told different stories, helped Stanford engineering teams study sustainable water systems, hosted community gathering during summer storm power outage. Sarah taught local kids about mechanical engineering using the pulley system. Tom wiped his hands on a shop rag and walked to the well, drawn by the sound of his daughter's voice. She'd grown during her first year at college, not just in knowledge, but in understanding. The well had become part of her story too, a bridge between her engineering studies and her family's legacy of service. "Dad," she called, waving him over, "tell them about the night you fixed it. Ancient history. he demurred, but her classmates insisted. As he told the story, now polished smooth as river stones by many tellings, he caught sight of a familiar figure walking up the garden path. Eleanor, returning from her morning errands, carried a fresh batch of mail and that day's newspaper. "Today's headline might interest you," she said, holding up the paper with a knowing smile. The story jumped out immediately. Local well inspires national movement. Communities revive historic water sources. Sarah's engineering professor had written a paper about the Thomson-Wilson well, exploring how its community-based model could be replicated in other towns. The article had caught national attention, leading to similar projects across the country. "Your mother," Eleanor said softly to Sarah, "would have loved seeing how far the ripples have spread." The students gathered around the well again, taking measurements and photos for their summer project. Their excited chatter mixed with the sound of piano scales drifting from the house, while the workshop's tools provided a steady, rhythmic backdrop. Tom thought about that night 1 year ago when he'd stopped to help an elderly woman with her broken well. He couldn't have known then how that simple act would transform not just his life, but Sarah's future, the community's heart, and now perhaps other communities across the country. The brass bucket caught the sunlight as Sarah demonstrated another lift, its gleaming surface reflecting more than just the summer sky. It reflected a legacy of kindness, a tradition of service, and the truth Claire had always known, that love, like water, finds its own way to keep flowing forward. Eleanor touched the well's stone rim gently, her teacher's hands strong and sure, despite the passing years. Herbert used to say that the greatest engineering feat isn't in the mechanism itself, but in how it brings people together. Sarah nodded, understanding now in a way she couldn't have before. That's what Mom meant, too, isn't it? About how fixing things is really about connecting people. "Yes," Tom said, watching his daughter stand tall and confident beside the well that had changed everything. "That's exactly what she meant." The water splashed softly as another bucket was drawn, its sound as familiar now as his own heartbeat. Everything had changed, yet everything important had remained the same. The rhythm of work and purpose, the flow of giving and receiving, the steady pulse of love passing from one generation to the next, as constant and life-giving as the water, flowing deep beneath their feet.